WWE 2K26 is set to be released in March of 2026, and it is currently November of 2025. However, one of the things that the fans of the franchise typically look forward to are the roster reveals, or more specifically, the post-game roster reveals. So today, I have compiled 5 DLC packs worth of DLC predictions. Now, I could just throw out all of the best possible names. However, I will be keeping my predictions as realistic as humanly possible, simply to temper my expectations as much as possible and to see in about 5 or 6 months if I can be at least somewhat accurate with my predictions. However, I will start with maybe the reason you've clicked on this video. 2 of the stars on the thumbnail of this video. Those stars are Chris Jericho and AJ Lee. We'll start with AJ Lee, who I think is a potential either pre-order bonus or deluxe or ultimate edition bonus exclusive, whatever you want to call it. I think it is very likely that AJ makes it into the game. As a matter of fact, I think it is a 100% chance that we get AJ Lee in WWE 2K26. However, how is the question. She could very much be a selling point for the main game. I don't see her being the cover star, but if we get the likes of CM Punk on the cover star, I do think she is likely for a potential bonus edition, like a deluxe or ultimate, or even a pre-order bonus, as she has pretty close relations to CM Punk, or so I've heard. So I do think AJ Lee will be a selling point, and there is also a high likelihood that that selling point could be her being the star of one of these DLC packs. However, I simply have her as either a pre-order bonus or a deluxe or ultimate edition exclusive. And then the second name there is Chris Jericho. Now, Chris Jericho, at the time of recording, is still an AEW contracted wrestler. However, it is highly speculated that he will be making his way over to the WWE, and a lot of signs point to him potentially making his grand return in Saudi Arabia at the Royal Rumble in 2026. I do think if Chris Jericho makes a return that soon, he is very likely to be in the DLC somehow, some way. Similar to AJ, I think he could be the star of a DLC pack, but I think most likely for Chris Jericho is Chris Jericho becoming a star like an Aleister Black from this year and being included in a WrestleMania 42 pack around the summer of next year. So I do think Chris Jericho and AJ Lee will be included in the DLC cycle somehow. Chris Jericho only if he ends up actually departing AEW and returning to the WWE, but I do think those are 2 huge names that could be selling points for WWE 2K26 in some way, shape, or form. But we will get into the actual DLC, and I have 5 packs put together, 5 packs that I think I did a decent job on. Let me know down below how you think I did. Make sure you like the video if you enjoy it, and subscribe if you enjoy this WWE 2K content. We will start with the very first pack, and probably the least exciting pack for me, the NXT pack, or as I coined it, the Future Stars pack. I think it is very easy to just throw a bunch of NXT's top names in here. Ricky Saints, Blake Monroe, those kinds of people, the biggest new stars in NXT. But I think those roster members will be a part of the base roster, at least they should, so I haven't included them in DLC. And this DLC I do think is kind of lackluster, but it simply comes because I think a lot of the future stars or big stars in NXT will be included in the base roster. So my NXT pack consists of LFG Season 1 winners Tyra Steele and Jasper Troy, the current Speed Champion. Niko Vance, a member of the Culling, who I think does have high upside, but I haven't really seen the potential in him just yet. I do think he is a possible name of the future, and I do think the likes of Izzy Dame, Tatum Paxley, and Sean Spears will absolutely be base game. I think Wren Sinclair has a high likelihood of being included in base game, but I do have her as one of the bigger stars in this NXT pack simply because I think she's a small enough name to be included in DLC and not pushed into the main game, but a big enough name to be included through the roster. And finally, Lainey Reid, who has rose to a more prominent role recently by joining Fatal Influence, but isn't really the biggest star, and I don't exactly see her making it into base game, as she made her NXT TV debut alongside Blake Monroe, who I think 2K will try to rush into the game. I don't think it'll be the same for Lainey Reid, as her recent rise to prominence comes mainly between the September and October months, and probably going into 2K26, so by the time 2K26 releases, maybe she'll be an even bigger star and one of the selling points of this pack. But those are my 5, and I do have some honorable mentions for this pack specifically, and that will come in the form of Dark State. I think Dark State absolutely makes it into this game, whether it be base or DLC roster, but I do think they have a bigger chance of making it into base game. That is because they've had 2 NXT championship reigns so far, one that began in August and ended in October, another that began in late October, and at the time of recording is still going today. I think all 4 members of Dark State will make it into WWE 2K26, and you can either include them in this NXT pack, replace some of the NXT pack with them, or just include them in base game, which is what I'm banking on. There's also the possibility of Shiloh Hill, Skylar, Raye, Jackson Drake, Callie Armstrong, and Kendal Gray, some Evolve champions and LFG winners from Season 2. I think it is possible that all of those names could make it in, but I don't think they've made enough of an impact on actual main NXT TV that they will be included or will be spotlighted names for this DLC. The next pack is the Legends pack, and I have for this pack Brian Pillman, someone who's been out of the game since 2K17, and I thought would make a return in this year's DLC, but did not. I think he has a high chance of making it into 2K26, as well as Demolition, who haven't been included in a game since WWE 12. I would love to see them in their aesthetics back in the game. I'm not really a big fan of the era that they reigned in. However, I do recognize their importance on professional wrestling, and I think their look is really cool. I would love to see them back in the WWE mainline video games, as well as Bam Bam Bigelow, who I believe has been out since 2K19, maybe 20, but I believe 19, and Bam Bam could make a huge impact returning to these games, as well as 2 debuting names for the 2K franchise in Leilani Kai and Kelly Kelly, 2 polar opposites, but I do think both of those stars could make huge impacts through the DLC of WWE 2K26, and finally, someone who also was removed from the games in 2K19, but we know is under a Legends contract. That is Jacqueline, another legend of the early 2000s, late 90s era that I think could make a huge impact in this Legends pack, and I would love to see all 7 of these stars back in the game. However, I do recognize that DLC packs, especially with this year, have a spotlight on mainly 5 names and not 7, but I did just want to kind of throw all of these legends out there as possibilities to be DLC. In pack number 3, we have a very divisive pack, and that consists of 4 names particularly that I think a lot of people might roll their eyes at. One name not so much, because she is an actual big-time legendary wrestler, but the other 4, I think a lot of people might not like this pack, but a lot of people might like this pack. So we will start with the most controversial and get to the least controversial, starting at the most controversial, Jelly Roll. Jelly Roll is a celebrity, he is a country star, and he made his in-ring debut to the WWE at SummerSlam 2025 in a losing effort against Drew McIntyre and Logan Paul. I think Jelly Roll could be a spotlight for this game. Like several celebrities in the past, I think he could be the soundtrack curator and an in-ring DLC model like his past collaborators MGK and Post Malone in 2K22 and 2K24 respectively. The next name is another celebrity, and that is IShowSpeed, who made a huge impact at the Royal Rumble of 2025. There was some speculation that he could be involved, and then he Twitch streamed his entrance as he replaced Akira Tozawa, got speared out of his shoes, got cut up pretty badly, getting eliminated from the match by Braun Breaker, and I think IShowSpeed is probably one of the most likely celebrities alongside Jelly Roll to make it in to the WWE 2K26 DLC or just video game period, and I absolutely do not want him in a Prime bottle, pretty please. Now we get to actual in-ring active wrestlers, and we start with Joe Hendry. Joe Hendry is a former TNA superstar who is now a WWE roster member. Joe Hendry, I think, will absolutely be included in this game. And like Jordan Grace last year, has made enough of an impact through, no pun intended, through her TNA crossovers with WWE, and now that he's signed with the WWE and is pretty marketable, I think he will be one of the spotlighted stars within this pack. And then we will close things out of the controversial names with Mr. Iguana. Mr. Iguana I don't think is as controversial. Maybe he's pretty controversial. I don't know, but I want to see Mr. Iguana added to the DLC. He is the most likely AAA star that I see getting included in this DLC, and I will get into more of them in just a minute, but I do think Mr. Iguana with Layeska will be included in the 2K26 DLC. And finally, the least controversial name, but probably one of the favorites that I think a lot of people would love to see back in a wrestling video game to close out the Sensations pack is Melina. Melina is literally a sensation. That was literally her gimmick. The paparazzi followed her around everywhere. Melina has one of the most iconic entrances in women's wrestling history, or just recent wrestling history, that a lot of people are pretty big fans of, and I think Melina would be a welcome addition to the WWE 2K26 DLC. But if you want to stay controversial and you want to stay on the road of celebrities, I think you could replace her with Sexy Red or something like that, but I would prefer Melina. We will then move on to the Ruthless Aggression pack, and that will consist of 6 stars who I think should be spotlighted in these games and really haven't at all. Now we will start things off with someone who hasn't been included in these games in quite a while, and that is Tajiri. I think Tajiri has been out of these games the longest out of anybody, and I would love to see Tajiri make it back into the game, despite his green mist maybe not being the most iconic, because I think you can give that to the Great Muta, and even Shinsuke or Asuka, who use it more recently. I think Tajiri is one of the more iconic uses of the mist, and probably the first person I ever saw use it. I would love to see him use that green mist in a video game, and I would love to see Tajiri make an impact in WWE 2K26 alongside a former on-screen partner who also hasn't been included in the games since I believe SVR 2008, and that is Tori Wilson. Tori, one of my favorites of this era, hasn't been included in a game in way too long, and I think it is time that she makes a return back to the video game franchise, especially with more recent appearances coming through the Royal Rumbles and Evolution in the past, as well as a star who hasn't been featured in a game since WWE 12, and that is Chavo Guerrero. I would love to see him make a return to the games, and he has reportedly signed a contract with the WWE, seemingly under the AAA banner, but that makes it way more possible than him not signing any sort of contract to the WWE umbrella. So Chavo Guerrero, I would love to see make a return to these video games, especially alongside Eddie Guerrero, who this pairing hasn't been able to be featured in a WWE video game in quite a while. The next name I got is Finley, someone who loves to fight and hasn't been included in a game since WWE 2K16, but I want short-haired, bleach blonde Finley who was wrecking people with a shillelagh in the mid-2000s that I grew up watching. I would love to see Finley added back to these games and include the shillelagh, which Sheamus has also used in the past few years, but we haven't seen that weapon in quite a while. I would love to see Finley back in a wrestling video game alongside Hornswoggle. I know, but Hornswoggle hasn't appeared in a game since SVR 2011, and he wasn't even a playable character. He was simply a manager. Make him a playable character. I think he would be very fun to play as because of the difference between him and a lot of other characters throughout the game, and I think putting the Hornswoggle against the Great Khali would be very cool. But to close out the Ruthless Aggression pack, one of the most iconic women in the Ruthless Aggression is someone who has appeared in more recent games but hasn't appeared since WWE 2K22, and that is Mickie James. After her release from the WWE in 2021, she made an impact, no pun intended, yet again in TNA, even appearing in the Women's Royal Rumble as a Knockouts champion, but with the TNA partnership and her recent TNA Hall of Fame induction, as well as the LFG series under the WWE umbrella that she did participate in. I think it is much more possible now than it was a year or two ago that Mickie James could make it into the WWE 2K26 DLC. But we have one more pack to go before we close things out, and it's probably the pack that everyone is clamoring for because I have some AAA and TNA talent in the Worlds Collide or Showdown pack, whatever you want to call it, but I call it the Worlds Collide pack because so many worlds are colliding through this. Now I have 6 names, but some potential honorable mentions that I don't know how they will handle this if we actually do get these people into the game. I would love to see an entire AAA roster. I would love to see an entire TNA roster, but I don't think it is likely we get too much of either. So my honorable mentions will come in the form of the Rascals, Trey Miguel and Zachary Wentz. Natty Neidhart, not Natalia, but Natty Neidhart in that persona. I would love to see that in the game, but not through a paid DLC, even though she has made a pretty big impact throughout AAA under that persona. As well as Fabi Apache, Flammer, and La Parka, who have all made an impact across the AAA and WWE partnership. But I do have 6 names for this pack, and I don't know exactly how divisive these names may be, but I feel like all 6 of these names have made enough of an impact to be included through the WWE 2K26 Showdown, Worlds Collide, whatever you want to call it, DLC, starting off with Ash by Elegance. Ash by Elegance, formerly known as Dana Brooke in the WWE, made a huge impact. I keep saying impact. No pun intended at all to the TNA partnership. One of the most prominent TNA appearances of the year came when Ash by Elegance won that title off of current reigning NXT Women's Champion Jacy Jayne. I think that's a pretty big moment, and I think you can capitalize on that by including Ash in the 2026 DLC. I do think she is popular enough despite her recent stepping away from in-ring competition, but I do think Ash by Elegance could be included in the 2K26 DLC alongside someone who made a big impact at Halloween Havoc this year in the form of El Hijo de Dr. Wagner Jr. Dr. Wagner Jr. was someone who was somewhat familiar by name to me, but I hadn't really seen much of his until the first Worlds Collide, and I was quickly impressed by him, but he made an even bigger impression on me by taking on and defeating El Messias at Triple Mania, and then going on to that 4-way at the second Worlds Collide. And I think the biggest impression that he's made on anybody across the WWE landscape that hadn't seen him prior was his Day of the Dead match against Ethan Page at Halloween Havoc. I think that would be a huge addition to the 2K26 DLC, especially if you include his Halloween Havoc tribute gear to Rey Mysterio. I think that would be amazing, and I would love to see El Hijo de Dr. Wagner Jr. included in the 2K26 DLC. And we'll stick with AAA with someone who was featured pretty prominently on an actual WWE pay-per-view, that being Octagon Jr. Octagon Jr. hasn't gotten as big of a spotlight as I really thought he would following that huge appearance, but that was a huge appearance. So Octagon Jr., after taking on and losing to the Intercontinental Champion Dominic Mysterio in an Intercontinental Championship match on WWE's Money in the Bank pay-per-view, I think made enough of an impact to be featured in the 2K26 DLC, because if you haven't watched the Worlds Collide shows or haven't kept up with AAA after any of those shows, then the most casual of WWE fans who may have watched Money in the Bank and may be looking at the DLC of 2K26 will recognize him over a lot of other names that have been featured across the Worlds Collide shows. But someone who has main evented both Worlds Collide shows, someone who was a former AAA Mega Champion defeating Alberto El Patron, which a lot of AAA fans did not like, but dropped the title to Dominic Mysterio at Worlds Collide number 2. El Hijo del Vikingo, I think, is a shoo-in for WWE 2K26. If any AAA stars are included, I think he is the second most likely person under Mr. Iguana. Vikingo really felt like the initial figurehead of the company, as at WrestleMania 41, he was with all of the WWE talent when this partnership was announced by Rey Mysterio, and he even showed up at that actual WrestleMania when he came out to help Rey Fenix after El Grande Americano tried to capitalize after his victory at that WrestleMania. So Vikingo is another one of those more recognizable names in AAA that I think if there's a AAA pack of any sort, I think he will be included in that. And then the two most probable names on the TNA side, I think, are obviously the Hardy Boys, and they will close out this DLC pack, because this is not only one of the best tag teams in the history of TNA or current TNA, this is one of the best tag teams in the history of professional wrestling. So Jeff making a return from WWE 2K22 and Matt making a return from WWE 2K20, I think will round out this pack as the biggest stars in the pack and one of the biggest selling points in the entire DLC period, and I think this would make this pack the most exciting across all 5. But I don't think you should stop at superstars. I think we should expand to hopefully the TNA World Knockouts and potentially tag and women's tag and X Division and all those titles, but at least the TNA World and Knockouts Championships, as well as the AAA Mega Championship, and potentially the Latin American Reina de Reinas and other AAA championships. But I do think including the TNA World, TNA Knockouts, and AAA Mega Championships should be a necessity for 2K26, if it is legally possible, of course. And I would also love to see some cool arenas for AAA and TNA if that's physically possible. And if we can't get any of that, I would love to see Showdown and Worlds Collide if that is possible. But let me know which of these DLC stars you would love to see in WWE 2K26. And if I went 0 for 31, shame on me, I guess. Let me know who you would like to see in WWE 2K26's DLC. But if you did enjoy the video, however, make sure you like it and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this in the future. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.